We are not a medical device company and nothing we say is medical advice. So we always recommend that clients consult with a healthcare professional before using our device. Welcome to our presentation on clinical integration of the Neuradiant 1070. In this presentation, we'll take a look at the best practices for integrating photobiomodulation into your practice, and more specifically, using the Neuradiant 1070 to do so. When integrating a new technology into your practice, there's obvious trepidation and cause for concern because everything is new. You haven't used it on a client before. You don't know which button leads to what screen. You don't know who to use it on, who not to use it on. And these are completely understandable concerns. And I'd argue that if you didn't have any questions or concerns when using a new technology, then that's certainly not a great sign either. But the last thing we want to do at Neuronic is sell you this device and be like, see ya, good luck, and let you fend for yourself. We are dedicated to helping you integrate this device into your practice in the smoothest way possible. I'm your speaker, Nicole, and I'm the clinical integration specialist here at Neuronic, which is a transcranial photobiomodulation company. I previously studied neuroscience at the University of British Columbia, where I was part of a lab that focused on mental health outcomes for type 1 diabetics, and another lab that looked at the relationship between aging, cognition, and mobility. After that, I got into the world of neuromodulation, working in a neurofeedback clinic, and voila, here I am working at Neuronic. I also work with a psychologist here in Vancouver doing neurofeedback and other neuromodulation techniques and using PBM as well. We've got a lot of fun stuff packed in this presentation, and here's just an overview of the topics we're going to cover. The natural place to start is defining what is photobiomodulation, or PBM. You likely know what PBM is, but we're going to discuss how to explain this to a client in an easy to understand way, more so in layman's terms. We'll look at who transcranial photobiomodulation, or tPBM, is for, discuss contraindications, look at the biphasic dose response and overstimulation reactions or side effect reactions, looking at integration models, so how it's integrated with other modalities versus a standalone modality, rental programs versus bundled in a package, etc. Device use, so our preset protocols versus clinical protocols. Device hygiene, so the best ways to clean the device and keep it nice and tidy. Protocol development. We won't go too in-depth here about development based off of a QEEG or specific conditions, but rather just some brief rules of thumb. Metrics and how we can track progress using our device. And progress timelines, so when to see results, when you might want to try another protocol, etc. And we'll also have a supplemental document with a bunch of resources mentioned throughout this presentation, as well as other helpful tools to integrate the device in your practice and just help with education as well. So what is photobiomodulation and how do we communicate this to clients? When someone hears the word photobiomodulation for the first time, they might get a little bit scared off because it sounds like a very complex word that they can't say 5 times fast. But when we break this word down into its parts, it's actually not that scary. It's just 3 very understandable terms linked together. When we break it down to the most simplest form, photo refers to light, bio refers to life, and modulation refers to some type of change, like how we can change a block of clay into pottery. Putting this together, we can understand that photobiomodulation is the change that light has on life. Now that we have the basic definition down, if we're to get a little bit more technical, PBM refers to the intervention of cellular processes and biochemical reactions in living cells through photonic energy. To do this, we can use either lasers or light-emitting diodes to deliver the light, and it's usually broken up into red light therapy or near-infrared light therapy. Now, if we were to explain this to a client, what I would say is that PBM uses near-infrared light, which is a light outside of the visible spectrum, to penetrate the skull and enter the mitochondria to help create more energy molecules for the cell. This technology can help increase circulation, decrease inflammation, and protect cells. Obviously, this is a bit of a limiting definition, and PBM can have different functions depending on the disease. But this is just more of a broad explanation for someone just getting started and introduced to this new technology. Who is transcranial photobiomodulation for? If I had a dime for every time somebody asked me, can I use PBM for X condition, I would probably be a millionaire traveling the world, because the truth is, the better question is, who is PBM not for? And while there are certain conditions and contraindications that we will touch on later, like having metal in your head or a brain tumor, there are also so many benefits to PBM, like increasing circulation, decreasing inflammation, etc., that it can be a benefit to most people. That being said, there is research in all of these conditions, like neurodegenerative diseases, traumatic brain disorders, neurodevelopmental disorders, psychiatric diseases, and so many more. There are also a lot of great proactive uses of tPBM, such as priming the brain before a sports game. So if the player does get a head injury, like a traumatic brain injury or concussion, it can actually reduce the recovery time needed. Contraindications. Now, with any technology, there's going to be an exclusion group of folks recommended not to use the device for various reasons, and PBM is no different. Regardless of who you are, though, we are not a medical device company, and nothing we say is medical advice. So we always recommend that clients consult with a healthcare professional before using our device. That being said, we list the following as contraindications: metal plates, implanted stimulation devices, or metal objects in the brain. And this is just because it can cause heating of the metal and potentially damage the surrounding tissue. The one exception to this is titanium plates, because it does not absorb near-infrared light, similar to other metals. Some providers will work with folks with deep brain stimulation devices, but just turn off the quadrant where the implant is. But I recommend running this by a healthcare professional just to be sure. We also advise against anyone with cancer, malignant tissues, active carcinoma, and brain tumors, because PBM has the potential to enhance angiogenesis of tumors and cell proliferation. So we don't want to run that risk with cancer cells. Additionally, due to PBM having large systemic effects, meaning you can apply PBM to one area like the head and see an impact in other parts of the body too, we just advise against it, or at least seeking medical advice before using it. Now, these are just some conditions to exercise a little bit of extra caution with. So medications causing light sensitivity, I would just recommend running this by your doctor, because it has not been studied in depth enough. But it's also a little bit of a tricky one, because these medications can be widely used, such as contraceptives and antihistamines. And we haven't seen this be an issue yet, but just logically, if you're on a medication with light sensitivity and applying light to yourself, it just gives grounds for questioning. Open wounds on the head, we also list as a contraindication. And actually, a lot of work in PBM circulates around wound healing specifically, but we approach this contraindication more from the perspective of contamination, especially in a clinical setting. If you're using the device on someone with an open wound, it may be grounds for infection and contaminate the device and make it harder to clean thoroughly. So we just warn against that as well. Additionally, we list pregnancy as a contraindication. This is listed as a contraindication with most things just due to the inability to do clinical trials on pregnant women for obviously ethical reasons. And the last one listed here is hyperthyroid conditions. We list this as a contraindication just because research suggests that PBM can stimulate thyroid activity. If you have hyperthyroidism, then the last thing you need is for your thyroid to be stimulated even more. So we recommend talking to your doctor about that as well. Biphasic dose response and overstimulation. Now we'll look at the biphasic dose response of light therapy and some overstimulation reactions that might occur. And if you're like, I have no idea what either of those words mean or entail, then you are in the right place, because we will start from square one. Some of you may already know what the biphasic dose response is, but regardless, let's just start by defining this term. The biphasic dose response refers to a dose-response relationship in which a substance or stimulus produces opposite effects at low and high doses. So a low dose may provide you with some stimulating effects, but the results don't last long, or they're just not producing the strong response that you're looking for. Alternatively, a high dose may induce an inhibitory effect or even cause damage. In terms of side effects of using the device, studies have shown that light therapy behaves using a biphasic dose response And the way I like to describe this is similar to Goldilocks and her porridge. So you don't want it too hot, you don't want it too cold, you want it just right. So similarly, too little light stimulation may not show any results, but too much light stimulation will show signs of overstimulation. So you want to find that sweet spot, which is the peak of that bell curve that you see on the screen. In more scientific terms, the biphasic dose response suggests that there's an optimal range of light exposure that yields therapeutic benefits without causing harm. Research suggests that the biphasic dose response is tied to levels of reactive oxygen species and their production in cortical neurons. I would suggest actually reading into Mike Hamlin's paper on this for more information. So how do you know if you've gone too far and are landing on that right side of the bell curve? That is when you experience what we call overstimulation reactions. And there are a few theories surrounding overstimulation, such as mitochondrial overactivation, dehydration due to increased metabolic demands, etc. But there's some research that suggests that overstimulation is not necessarily about having too much of that reaction that creates ATP, generates nitric oxide, etc., that your system becomes overwhelmed, but rather that a second mechanism gets initiated and superimposes the first mechanism. This second mechanism is called reactive gliosis, where glial cells in the central nervous system, particularly astrocytes and microglia, become activated in response to injury, disease, or other forms of CNS stress. Mike Hamlin's work goes more into depth on how and why overstimulation reactions occur and what that looks like on more of a microscopic level with reactive oxygen species and such. But these are the signs of overstimulation that we tell our clients to look out for: anxiousness, congestion, headache, dizziness, irritability, and onset of sleepiness or fatigue. The overstimulation reactions, if they occur, are super rare, first of all, but they're also very mild and transient. And they'll either occur while the device is on the person's head or up to around 2 hours after the session, but they typically occur within that first hour after the session. Now, if your client experiences any overstimulation reactions, there are a couple of contributing factors that you should look at. Number one, when do these reactions occur? This is just to double check that the reactions are occurring at a time frame where it could be possible that it is linked to device use, so within 1 to 2 hours after the device has been used or during the session. Second question is, has the client ate or drunk water before the session? Before using an intervention like PBM, it's imperative that we make sure we supply the brain with the resources it needs to be productive with the energy that we're giving it. So this question is a good place to start to address that. Next, have you had any new diagnoses? For example, if they just got diagnosed with COVID, that could be the reason they have congestion. Next is, have they recently had any changes in medication, introducing other modalities or new life changes? It's always good to try to rule out other extraneous variables that could be contributing to these effects that they're having. Obviously, medications and other modalities can have a host of side effects, but if they're undergoing significant stress due to a life change, like a move or loss of a loved one, this could also result in something like a headache, for example, and it could result in their body just being a little extra sensitive to external stimuli. Another question here is, has the client been using the correct protocol? And this really only applies if the client is taking the device home with them and using it by themselves. If they are under the care of a provider using it at the clinic, this is likely not to happen. But if they're using a protocol with their own device or a rental device at home, this might be a good thing to double check. Once you've gotten a better understanding of the contributing factors of the overstimulation that the client is experiencing, then you can look at next steps going forward, and I'll give you just a few tips on that. The first is adjusting the protocol intensity and or time. We recommend not surpassing 30 minutes per session, maximum 2 sessions a day, and we seldom see that people get overstimulated even with 30 minutes, but obviously everybody is different. So if you're using the preset glow, for example, and that's at 10 minutes and they're getting too overstimulated, then you might want to start at 2 minutes of the protocol, then move to 3 minutes, then 4, and so on. You could also adjust the intensity. So if you're using Energize or Balance, which is at 75% intensity, then you might want to start at 25%, then work up to 50%, and then work finally up to 75%. And there's a button just below Glow that's called Custom Program, where you can manually input the intensity and time and pulse rate of the protocol you want to try. Another suggestion is adjusting the pulse rate. Now, this is a bit trickier because you choose the pulse rate for a reason. Perhaps you notice it's a region that needs to be targeted, or that it's what the research suggests is the best option based on their condition. However, I could speak from experience and say that sometimes people don't respond well to certain pulse rates. For example, I used a 10 hertz protocol and I did great with it. Used a 40 hertz protocol, did fantastic with it. But as soon as I tried a 20 hertz protocol, I started getting sweaty palms and anxious and just overstimulated in general. And I even tried that protocol again the next day, and same thing. So sometimes people just don't have a good reaction to certain protocols. So it might be worth trying a different one. And the third tip here is if you've tried all the above and the person is still getting these reactions, I would recommend stopping device use for a week or so and seeing if the symptoms subside. If they do, it could be related to the device. And if they don't, there may be an underlying issue that requires some attention or other extraneous variables at play. When in doubt, always refer that they get checked out by a doctor. The next topic we're going to look at is the integration models of tPBM, and this will be both from a business perspective and a clinical perspective. So the business perspective will touch on how other practices have clients using their device via clinic visits, rentals, or at-home use. And then the clinical side is how it's integrated with other modalities. So from that business point of view, there's kind of three main models that providers use to integrate the device into their practice and offer it as a modality for their clients. One, which is probably the most obvious one, is using the device in their practice. So at their center, at their clinic, whatever it is. And we've seen providers use the helmet right before neurofeedback. We've seen some use it in the waiting room right before the client session begins. There's kind of a myriad of ways that providers have integrated it into their practice. And some providers want clients to be using the device more than just once or twice a week when they see them, when they come into the clinic to do neurofeedback or to do physiotherapy or whatever it is. So in that case, we have other options for those folks. So some places will offer a rental program where clients can rent out the device for a monthly fee so that they can use it every day. Obviously, if you are a provider, this involves a bit of a risk assessment in terms of how you'll handle things if the client breaks the device or loses it. But regardless, some places choose to offer this and do great with it. And then the final option here is having your clients purchase a device for themselves so that they can use it for at-home use every day. Through our affiliate program, we can offer you a code that your client can use to purchase a device. And so they will get $100 off a device, and then you, the provider, will get a cut of the commission for every time that your code is used. With this option and the rental one, you can set your client up with a clinical protocol that they can use at home twice a day, every day. And you can also do further PBM consultations if you choose. So those last two options are for more frequent use than if you have someone just coming to the clinic once or twice a week, where they would use it in your practice. Now, when it comes to how providers actually use the device in their practice with clients, there's two approaches to how PBM is used. One is as a standalone modality, and the other is integrated with other modalities and used more as a primer before using those other modalities. Starting with the first point there, some providers will offer this as an option for people to come in and just run a session of PBM and then leave. Some places charge on a session-by-session basis, whereas others will offer a package of, call it 10 PBM sessions. But this is kind of just one option. This is a bit more rare, though, because providers often use PBM in tandem with another modality, which brings me to my second point, that PBM is a great primer before using another modality. So oftentimes clients will start with PBM before moving into another modality like neurofeedback, hyperbaric oxygen, physiotherapy, what have you. The Neuradiant 1070 comes with many features that can be used in different scenarios, so we'll review what those features are so you can optimize the use of this device as much as possible. Each device comes with three types of protocols: the preset protocols, custom programs, and clinical protocols. We'll go through each of these individually next. As you can see here, we have 4 preset protocols, and they each come with a specific pulse rate that falls either in the alpha, beta, or gamma range. There's no pulse rate on glow, and that's because it's just continuous wave light. All these protocols have fixed times, pulse rates, and intensities, but when you access our clinical protocols or custom programs, you'll see that you can edit those values to fit specific needs. While we say you can do up to 30 minutes of PBM twice a day, these presets are a great primer before a session with another modality and are super beneficial on the clinical integration front, as they're just simply a plug and play kind of protocol, and they don't take a lot of time either. A lesser known function on this device is the custom program setting, which sometimes people can confuse with the clinical protocol setting, which we'll talk about after this. The custom program setting allows the time, intensity, and pulse rate to be adjusted to essentially create your own protocol. However, I find this most useful when wanting to take one of the preset protocols and make a simple modification to it. So say you're using the PEACE protocol on a client, which is 10 hertz, 9 minutes long, 25% intensity, and you decide that your client may need a higher intensity. You can simply enter in the same pulse rate of 10 and the time of 9 minutes, but then make the intensity 50% instead of 25%, or 75% instead of 25%. And this is also a really helpful tool when starting out with a client and wanting to test the waters with them, especially if it's a child or someone with extra sensitivities. You could program a protocol that's just 1 minute long, start them there, and then move them up to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, so on and so forth. Now, clinical protocols are where you can really customize the protocol for the client. Oftentimes, providers will use a QEEG to employ the 4-quadrant feature, where you're only targeting one region with specific settings. And essentially, this feature enables you to create more of a tailored protocol for your client based off their specific needs. Sometimes providers will use this function to combine preset protocols as well. So for example, if you wanted to run glow and then focus, you can program the clinical protocols. So step 1 resembles glow, step 2 resembles focus with the same settings, time, pulse rate, and intensity. And when you click start, it'll just run step 1 and then step 2 in sequence. And there's a great video walking you through how to program these clinical protocols, so I'll take you there now. So you'll notice that each clinical protocol contains 4 steps. You can turn on or off certain steps based off of your needs. And when you click start on this clinical protocol, it will run through the steps automatically in sequence. You don't need to start and stop between each step. You can edit the duration of each step based on your needs by editing the time under duration on the right. And some providers also opt to add a step that's a break, which essentially means it runs through the duration of the step, but there's no stimulation. To do this, you would click into the step and turn off all the quadrants of the brain so that there's no stimulation. And the quadrants of the brain would just be gray instead of green. Breaks are great, especially for longer protocols where the helmet is running nonstop and can get a bit warmed up. Those are great protocols to add a break in. Breaks are also a great technique to employ in overstimulation cases and just broadly in general for use cases. You can add a step in between your first and second step. That's just a break to help give the client a rest and help the light get absorbed properly. When you click on the step itself, you'll be taken into this page with the brain. And here's where you can turn on and off certain quadrants and edit the pulse rate and intensity of each. If you're using a global protocol, as in you're using all 4 of the quadrants at the same setting, you can use the Control All function in the upper right corner. If you click Control All and change the pulse rate to 40 hertz, for example, it will turn all the quadrants to 40 hertz as their pulse rate. But you can also change the pulse rate of each quadrant individually. So for example, if you wanted the left quadrant to be 14 hertz and the right quadrant to be 15 hertz, you can edit it to be that way with their own individual pulse rates. So the world really is your oyster when it comes to clinical protocols and optimizing them for client use. You'll notice when you're looking at a clinical protocol that under total time, it says cycles. And what this refers to is how many times the protocol is run. So you say you have a clinical protocol that is 3 steps at 1 minute each. That makes the total time of the protocol 3 minutes. But if you wanted to repeat the protocol twice, you could change the cycles to 2, and then it would be a 6-minute protocol. So whether you're using preset protocols, custom programs, or clinical protocols, they're all great. It's more so just a matter of the use case and understanding when each type of protocol may be better than others. A question we sometimes get from providers is, how do you clean the device? And oftentimes providers are seeing multiple clients a day, so they want to clean the device between uses. And there are a few ways that you can do that. To clean the device, it's very simple, and the easiest way is to just use alcohol wipes, like isopropyl alcohol wipes, to clean the interior, just making sure that no liquid seeps through any of those openings in the device. Another option you could use is a UV light wand, and this is a little less accessible than alcohol wipes, but is another option for sure. Through our website, we also offer additional pads that go on the perimeter of the helmet that you can purchase if you want to have those pads be unique to each client that you have and assign a new set per client that you see. We have also had providers cover these pads in clear tape so that they can wipe them down easier between uses, but that's totally up to you. And in a similar vein to hygiene, some people ask about how fragile our device is. And I know some of our employees with pets or who are just clumsy have had the device, both controller and helmet, fall on the floor, and they are pretty durable. That being said, it is still a device, so try your best to be careful with it. Now, in this module, we're going to cover the basics of protocol development and how we approach creating protocols here at Neuronic. There is no silver bullet protocol that works for everyone with a certain condition, so I'm not going to get into the specifics of protocol development, but more so considerations that we're mindful of when developing protocols. I'll be referencing some forms that we use, and I'll include these forms in our resources so you have a better idea of what we're talking about. One essential part of protocol development is consulting some type of intake form. In our intake form, we ask questions about current health conditions. We have a space for clients to check off which symptoms they're experiencing and which symptoms are of most concern to them and the ones they want to target the most. At Neuronic, when we work with these clients one-on-one, we'll often review these forms ahead of time and we'll get a better idea of their history, goals, and conditions. Clients also fill out a CNS sensitivity form, which assesses their sensitivities towards certain things, and they can rate this on a Likert scale. For example, one question to assess cognition would be, I feel foggy and have problems with clarity. A question that assesses a physical symptom is something like, I have head pain that is throbbing. So depending on how sensitive the client is, this may affect that duration and intensity that you start out with and can also help narrow down their goals a bit more. And of course, as with most things, we also use a consent form at Neuronic, and we recommend that you use one too. Beyond providing consent, this form also outlines contraindications and people who should not be using the device, as well as overstimulation symptoms. Number 2, metrics to guide protocol creation. So this more so pertains to any tailored clinical protocols that you're making for your client. And at Neuronic, we use 2 different approaches to making protocol. One is based off of a QEEG, and one is based off of research. I won't get into the particulars of QEEG protocol development because that could be just a whole video in itself. But Neuronic offers lots of resources for that, including our mentorship programs, as well as there's a module in our masterclass, module 11, I believe it is, addressing this. And it teaches you how to create a protocol based off of a QEEG. And we also do offer a protocol creation program where a Neuronic consultant can make a clinical protocol based off of an edited QEEG report that you submit. And the second one here is research. So in the PBM community, there's research surrounding certain pulse rates with certain conditions. So for example, using 40 hertz for dementia or using 10 hertz for anxiety, you can find those in research and base your clinical protocols off those. The third consideration here is about adding breaks to your protocols. This may help with ensuring that light absorption is sufficient between steps and to help the device from overheating. So that might look like something like having step 1 at 3 minutes of stimulation, step 2 being a 2-minute break, and then step 3 being 3 minutes of stimulation. Another consideration is something I call protocol titration. So as we know, every client has their own level of sensitivity. So for example, 10 minutes on one person might be great, but on another person, it just might be too much. So what I like to recommend to providers is implementing protocol titration. So something like from days 1 to 3, we'll do a 3-minute protocol. From days 4 to 6, we'll do a 5-minute protocol. Days 7 to 9, a 7-minute protocol, so on and so forth. This way, if your client experiences overstimulation, you can identify which increment it was on and work backwards if needed. And the fifth and final point I have here is just to be mindful of the type of stimulation you're using, more specifically with respect to pulse rate at different times of the day. For instance, beta and gamma protocols, such as balance and focus, are much more stimulating and seem to give the clients a lot more energy and motivation, whereas peace, which is in the alpha range, promotes more relaxation and calmness. So doing a beta or gamma protocol in the later afternoon or evening might just be a little too stimulating for your client and could run the risk of impacting sleep, whereas peace would be the opposite. Obviously, the impact is not the same on everyone, but it's just something to be mindful of nonetheless. Metrics are a super important part of integrating PBM into your practice, and as a side effect, can actually be a great opportunity for case studies within your practice as well. Depending on the background of the practitioner, there are quite a variety of metrics that providers can use depending on your field, but there are a few broad categories of metrics that are used in our experience. The first and most prevalent by far is QEEGs, and this is primarily used by neurofeedback providers where they do QEEGs themselves, but also some providers that choose to use a third party to send their clients to get a QEEG and get a protocol created based off of that. Aside from that, there are things like cognitive assessments. So Montreal Cognitive Assessment, colloquially known as the MoCA test, mini mental state examination, CNS vital signs, CogniFit, to name a few. Condition-specific questionnaires, these can range broadly. So some examples would be a post-concussion symptom scale, Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index, but the list does go on with this one. And then there's more physiological metrics. So something like heart rate variability is probably the most prevalent one used in our industry. And then there's client and family feedback. So just tracking improvements based off of what the client is noticing subjectively in their daily life, and also what the family is noticing about the client that's changing. A question that pops up quite often is, how long does it take to see results? And we can see some general trends in working with clients, but at the end of the day, it does come down to everyone's specific body and sensitivities. However, we recently did a study with our providers and asked this exact question pertaining to how long it takes them to see results in clients. And we calculated this with respect to how many times they saw them per week as well. Majority of the providers saw clients around 2 to 3 times per week and reported that it took around 5 sessions to start seeing results. And if you're seeing a client 2 to 3 days a week, that would be roughly around 2 weeks of use. Sometimes it does take a bit of tweaking protocols and making small adjustments to help enhance results, whether that's the time, pulse rate, or intensity, and working with those. And in our experience, we've seen that if you're not seeing results by 3 months, then this modality might not be right for you. We've made 90 days our return policy because of this to get your full amount of money back. And we have only had on average less than around 2% of people return their device. So most people do see results within this window. But if the client is not making progress, there are a couple tips to ensure that you're doing all you can. And one would be to ensure consistency. Obviously, if you're only seeing the client twice a week, consistency is a bit harder. But if your client is using it at home, this might be a bit more relevant. You optimally want to use it twice a day, 7 days a week. So ensuring consistency is very important for those clients. Secondly, you might want to consider increasing the duration and/or intensity of your session. This is especially important when it comes to the preset protocols. Peace, for example, is 9 minutes, but it's only at 25% intensity. So if you have a non-responder that's been using Peace, for example, then you might want to try upping the intensity first and maybe eventually the time and see if that helps. So this concludes our time together here learning about photobiomodulation. I hope this was super helpful in giving you an overview of some practical applications and integration techniques of this technology. And I'm more than happy to talk to you about this further or talk about any other questions you have or just wanting to learn more about anything that I touched on here. So I've listed my email there on the screen. Feel free to reach out at any point. Thank you all for watching.